making your way back to your seats, that would be great. We're going to make this a really peppy panel.
Happy panel. I'll go get him, Beth. 1 minute. Pretzel bites. You're competing with pretzel bites.
No, Emily. Oh, sorry. It's more just that you. All right, we're going to get started. Thank you. Good, good. I was joking a moment ago, although I'm not entirely sure it's a joke, and I know I'm the one, really, who had something to do with this, but I think the philanthropy panel comes last on Friday afternoon because everybody wants to know where the money is, right? You want to know what the money's up to. I, as a recovering philanthropist or philanthropy professional, who has also worked as a practitioner and policy person, I learned long ago that those who are tasked with giving grants can be great resources for thinking through strategies to address challenges and understand opportunities to leverage. I actually think foundation program people are vastly underutilized in this regard, although I'm not encouraging you all to now reach out to everybody because it's also hard to return all of the emails you get when you're giving away money. Now that I am back on the grant-seeking side of the table, I'm glad to be able to continue to convene and engage folks who spend their days considering how to invest in change and leverage impact in a focused way. It's harder than you would imagine. We will hear first briefly about the types of work our panelists are doing in this region, and I'm going to introduce them in a moment. And then we'll pivot to a conversation about the opportunities and challenges for impact in this region. Okay, we are really lucky to have with us today three funders from the region doing very different kinds of work that intersect in certain ways. We will hear from Renee Gonzalez, who is the director of the Fondo Mexicano, which is also known as the Mexican Fund for the Conservation of Nature. We will hear from Ted Kowalski, to my far right, who is the Colorado River Initiative Lead and Senior Program Officer for the Environment Program at the Walton Family Foundation. And we will hear from Emily Warren Armitano, who is the Director of Land Conservation and Water Programs for the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation based in Texas. We are thrilled to have you all here with us today. Thank you. Is Renee ready virtually? Should we start with her? Okay. We get Renee up. Hi, Renee.
Hi there.
Wow,
Great to
Renee
see
to
you.
infinity. How are you? Great, thank you. Why don't you go ahead, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for staying until a Friday afternoon. And it's been really a wonderful opportunity to hear all the speakers before, great friends. After so many years, it's really an ecosystem of efforts, along the northern part of Mexico. And thank you for the Salazar Center for having us here. And I want to, just start with a brief introduction what the Mexican Fund is and what we're doing, just an example of what we're doing in northern Mexico. So the Mexican Fund, or as you have probably heard from the previous speakers, it's an organization that has been working for 28 years in Mexico, supporting conservation of natural resources through more than 2,500 grants that have deployed about $200 million to the ground. The support to protected areas is Fondo Mexicano's largest program, followed by sustainable land use and also strengthening capacities. We don't do anything. We actually just channel the funds. So the executors are other organizations. So it's a big ecosystem. And financial mechanisms have evolved over the years, and northern Mexico is really an example of this. Let me show you just one area that you have been hearing from, because really the success is the result of many, many people, and we're very grateful to have many of them today. Here you have one part of Mexico where you see the state of Sonora and the state of Chihuahua, and up in the north, Arizona. And where you can see the different colors is where different schemes, conservation schemes, have evolved with different financial mechanisms. You will see in the next slide that we have like those polygons that you see in blue and also in green are two protected areas. They have received funding through an endowment fund that has been established in the Mexican Fund. It's an endowment that has become sort of a landmark, and also, sort of an example that has been followed in several countries in the world because of this private-public association between the National Fund, for the National Commission for Protected Areas, which is the federal agency in charge of protected areas in Mexico, and the Mexican Fund for Conservation of Nature, which is private. And over the years, we focused a lot on this management of these protected areas. But, different than in other countries, in Mexico, the land, as Lorenzo already said before, actually mostly belongs to the people. It's not federal land. It's actually, the National Commission of Protected Areas is really has as a task convincing the people that they use this land sustainably. So you actually need to work with private owners and also ejidos. And as as my predecessor said, the ejidos are also private, although they're community land. And so it is really a constant evolving mechanism of collaboration. And that has actually led to more to actually incorporate into the financial mechanisms private owners. So you can see there in orange, and you heard that from yesterday from Valerie Gordon, all the area of Cuenca Los Ojos in Sonora, thanks to a wonderful lady, Valerie Clark, that devoted 40 years of her life to restoring those lands along the border. There's 50,000 hectares today that are just an incredible example of restoration, especially along the riparian areas of this beautiful area in northern Mexico. And so you start building a corridor. And this Cuenca Los Ojos in Sonora, next to Arizona, actually right here has also an endowment. Lorenzo was an architect in this, and he talked a little bit about it before. And so that also led to actually have endowment funds, not only for the protected areas with a public agency, but now endowment funds for private owners that actually make out of the land commitment to the future. And then in the Chihuahua area, you will see a little hammer in red. That little hammer in red is a ranch, 18,500 hectares. They're donated from the Nature Conservancy to Fondo Mexicano. And in this land, we have 300 bisons that actually, have been growing from 30 to more than 300 now. And, 2 different groups have actually been transported to CEMEX. Alejandro already talked about how they received and are like doing great in Coahuila and Maderas del Carmen, right? And so this ranch also has an endowment fund that is actually put together by the Nature Conservancy and Fondo Mexicano. And, then you have the evolution of this financial mechanism, which is with the federal government, but with funds from, the Global Environment Facility and 23 other donors, private, bilateral, multilateral, then endowment funds from private foundations and into private land. And then the next step is, how do you actually start making a corridor out of it? And as my predecessors have talked about, carbon credits have become an increasingly important financial mechanism. We have been working for over 2 years, understanding, comparing this new flow of funds that is arriving, and finally have secured funds. Both Cuenca Los Ojos has secured funds and Fondo Mexicano, both for Cuenca Los Ojos and for Rancho El Uno, which will hopefully lead even more funds into the endowments that have already been established. So you have endowments for conservation, then you have carbon credits that actually can face, especially those years where the financial markets are not doing that great, and strengthen them with the carbon credits. And then finally, all around this area, you have a lot of land use, and you will see those circles around Rancho El Uno, and that is cotton being actually grown all around the protected area, and you can see that it's already going into the protected area. Cotton is not the solution for this area at all. It's an area, as you can see from the satellite imagery, it's very dry. And so, they are pumping water from more than 200 meters into the soil. And that is no good news if you think that due to climate change scenarios, these watersheds are really dry and are not going to be replenished at anywhere close to the rate that they're being pumped out. So regenerative cattle ranching is the adequate land use for this area. And so we have started just a project with Global Environment Facility funds through the World Bank, where through a call for proposals, we are supporting ranches that are going to be expanding with just regenerative ranching practices. And these ranchers have also been starting to engage with carbon credits. So out of this, initial philanthropy funds, then it's triggering the carbon credits, and it's triggering also the impact investment to actually, detonate not only cattle ranching, but also interesting supply chains where we can actually move towards an area that's larger. And so the neighboring land can actually enroll in this sustainable vision. And so it's through these financial mechanisms that over the years, I think we can actually look for long-term solutions. And definitely philanthropy is by far the basis that can detonate all this capacity building that can then trigger a landscape approach to a wider scale, which is what we're looking for in the next 10 years. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Renee. That was wonderful. Emily, would you like to go next?
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily, and I work for the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation out of Austin, Texas. And we are a family philanthropy, which is a different type of philanthropy if you're in the philanthropy world. So it's a very generous family that is deeply involved and engaged in all of our strategy making and where we choose to fund. And so we're just, me as a program director, I kind of am the one that gets to implement this vision for the family. So fortunately, I have the great pleasure of working for a wonderful family that is very generous and is very thoughtful in how they have approached conservation in Texas and beyond. So, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about like the inner workings of how we do philanthropy, just to kind of give context. And then I'm sure Ted will talk more about impact. So we really look at systems, big picture, all types of issues with respect to sustainability. And so that sustainability, environment, economic vibrancy, and social equity is really core to what everything we do. So we look at the concept, our model is knowledge to action, and what does that really look like on the ground? So we have like the ability to kind of like challenge or interrogate systems that exist and the assumptions that are kind of in the world. So it allows a lot of kind of like stepping back and looking kind of from the outside of, okay, this is happening, this is what the NGOs on the ground, people are working on, what people are experiencing, what the academics are saying, what the governments are doing, and what is the whole, what is the gap, what is not working or functioning. And so that's kind of the space in which we exist, or try to anyway. We work really, really hard to center people and communities in all of what we do. This goes at all types of levels. So it's trusted relationships between me and grantees. It's trusted relationships with the type of work that the foundation does and the staying power of what we do. So like oftentimes there's a project, yay, we're gonna give money, and it doesn't work and we bounce. That will break down all sorts of trust in a community. And so we at our foundation, we really want to build the relationships. We really want to be trusted. We want to, as Beth was saying, we want to help with strategies. We want to be part of that community. So, well, I guess I was supposed to talk about some challenges, but I don't know if I should wait until later. We have a lot of challenges at the same time. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to pass it on to
Do you want to talk at all about what you fund?
Oh,
That might be
yeah,
helpful.
that might be helpful. You guys not read my mind. So we have 5 programs. We fund land conservation, water, and it's water writ large. We fund sustainability education at universities. We fund clean energy transition, and we fund subsurface energy. And so we look at all of that, sort of how that all intersects, and how do we get towards a sustainable future, understanding that climate, population is growing, and all of the issues that we're hearing all day. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sorry, I should have started with that.
That's great. All right. Ted? you can go.
Great, thanks. My name's Ted Kowalski. I lead the Colorado River program for the Walton Family Foundation. And I need to tell you that I was with Emily earlier this week in California, and she told me she was going to wear orange to celebrate the Broncos' win last night, and now she's just mocking me. We are also a family-led foundation, like the George and Cynthia Mitchell Foundation. The Waltons get their wealth from the Walmart stores, and we fund $550 million a year towards K-12 education, towards environment, where it's focused on fresh water and oceans. And then we also fund work in the home region in Bentonville, Arkansas, and the Mississippi Delta area. And I'm lucky and really honored to represent and work with a family on their Colorado River work. And we do take a basin-wide approach, really focused on how we can ensure a healthy, sustainable Colorado River basin for future generations. And I'll talk a little bit about the work there. I want to take a step back and thank Beth and her great team for putting on a great conference over the last couple of days. And we've been a proud sponsor of this event for years past, and we're happy to support it this year as well. I mean, it's one thing that philanthropy can do is help support these convenings where you can learn, where you can hear what folks are doing in different parts of the work, and really help us be better than our individual projects or geographies. It's really like lifting us up and helping us see what we can be doing differently. Where is the creativity, as we were talking about earlier, and what we can do to better together as a community. I will also say that I worked for Ken Salazar at the state of Colorado when he was Attorney General, and so it's a special honor to be speaking to you all here today. I represented and then worked at the state agency at the Water Conservation Board for the state of Colorado for many years, and it's great to see our friends from Mexico here, and Tanya Trujillo used to be the New Mexico representative, and I was the Colorado representative, and back in 2004 or 5, we went down to the Delta and the border, and we were talking about these issues way back then. And one thing that philanthropy can do really well is support patient capital. We can say, this is an issue we're going to work on, we're going to keep on working. And if you had told me back then in 2004 or 5 that we would have a pulse flow to reconnect the river to the sea that we got to hear about earlier today, and that we would do it again and again, even when the reservoirs are at very low levels, I might have said that that's impossible or that that's not going to happen. But it really was a lot of the folks in this room, the NGOs that we work with, Jennifer Pitt, and our many colleagues who, at all levels of government and philanthropy and NGOs, civil society, working together to create the vision and then to implement the vision. And I really think philanthropy's role is that patient capital. It's also helping develop that vision. And I think certainly the resources, the funding can be very helpful. And we look at our funding and the work that we do, in terms of on the front end, like helping demonstrate a project or demonstrate a concept. I think philanthropy can be really helpful there. And I also think philanthropy can be really helpful on the back end where there's a gap. And I think back to recent conversations in Arizona and among the Colorado River Basin states where there was a drought contingency plan, and Arizona, the state of Arizona, has to take it to their legislature and get it approved if they're going to conserve water. And they were all but there, but they said, we need an additional $8 million. We're not going to be able to do it. And myself and Emily and a group of funders called the Water Funders Initiative said, if the $8 million is all that's keeping the state of Arizona to agree to the largest water conservation agreement in history, like, we will backstop that funding. We're not saying we're going to write you a check, each one of us as individual foundations, but we collectively are going to use our best efforts to come up with that $8 million. And lo and behold, a number of funders, we put up a matching pool, a number of corporations came in and they unlocked that match, and we were able to get to that $8 million that provided additional conservation. I don't think we would have realized that 1.2 million acre feet in the Colorado River Basin was just going to be a drop in the bucket, and that we need even more conservation in the way that climate change has affected us so quickly. But I believe in the people in this basin and the community, and I think we will be up to the challenge. I'll say one other thing about sort of the value or our role with regard to our role, meaning philanthropy and the Walton Family Foundation generally with regard to transboundary conservation. We work on a basin-wide scale from the headwaters all the way down to where the river doesn't meet the sea or occasionally meets the sea. And the river knows no boundaries, and civil society or philanthropy also can work across boundaries in ways that states or federal governments or local governments can't. I think we have some in common with our tribal friends in terms of we think multi-generationally, and there are tribes who are on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border or that are situated, within multiple states. And I think philanthropy has some of that in common with some tribes in that space. in terms of what we fund work in three big buckets. We support innovation around data and around nature-based solutions. We fund work around markets and how we can develop demand for sustainably produced goods and help also meet the supplies by working with farmers or ranchers within the Colorado River Basin. And then we also work on policy, trying to develop model policy, trying to build champions and leaders and the next generation of conservation-minded thinkers. And then we have an underarching sort of foundational piece, which is around communications. We support journalists and newspapers. We think a well-informed public is going to lead to better solutions around water and how we manage our rivers. We support lifting up diverse voices, tribes. We work with tribes and Hispanic communities and trying to make sure they're represented at the table, which they aren't always. And finally, we support funder collaboratives like the Water Funders Initiative that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So maybe I'll stop there and we can get to questions.
Great, thank you. Wonderful. I'm struck by the fact that we have with us Renee, who's from a fund that was originally publicly created and works at a national level. We have a family foundation that is more locally focused, and we have a family foundation that works more regionally and on more of a campaign basis almost. And I think it's been very interesting for me when I was earlier with the Gates Family Foundation in Denver to learn how the Colorado River Coalition did its work. And that is a group of nonprofits that work together to realize goals on the Colorado. Some of that work, or initially a great deal of that work, was funded through Walton, and I think that's continued to be true. But I'm struck by the fact that the adage I always heard and then found to be somewhat true when I was working in philanthropy is that if you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation, right? Because many funds are family-led, and families have different personalities, different values, and different goals, different attitudes about how they'd like to invest. But I think this type of collaboration that Ted just referenced, with the Arizona shortfall and the Water Funders group is an exception to that, and it gives me hope for big regional efforts. And I think, to my thinking anyway, that's the kind of effort it's the only kind of effort ultimately that will have a big impact in environmental issues at a regional or larger level. So that's my soapbox. But from that, I would ask each of you, what are your long-term goals to leverage your philanthropic investments into other public or private spending, if you have them? What are your goals to do that? How do you think about scale? Knowing that can be very meaningful at the very local scale. It can be meaningful at regional or national scales as well. Anybody want to take that first? Renee?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah, that would
great.
be great. Scale is definitely, scale is definitely like the challenge of today. We have 10 years to turn things around and save humanity from its own extinction, right? So we need to scale and accelerate the small successes that we have already in the field. And to acquire a larger area and reduce the time, it will require a quick aggregation of small projects that philanthropy has triggered in the last 30 years, at least in Mexico, that's what we're seeing. The challenge then is how do you articulate these pieces of conservation work and developing the capacities in different areas. So, for example, funds are available for carbon credits and impact investment, but all the financial experts will tell you there are very few bankable projects. So community projects, on the other hand, rarely speak the language of the investors. So in our experience, this leads to an asymmetry, and this asymmetry actually strains the possibility of making long-term changes. So in our view, philanthropy can only actually trigger and address this asymmetry by concentrating on building governance in communities. That leads to organization. And then these people can then make decisions that actually reach a higher scale. And, governance comes with financial inclusion, because then the capacity building can actually, then leads to this symmetry between the financial sector and the conservation world. And then peer-to-peer exchanges we've seen over the years actually can accelerate the process. So, if you aggregate projects, how do you aggregate them fast? And it's much easier that a cattle rancher speaks to another cattle rancher, how he achieved the, success, to actually have the neighboring, land start practicing things. So I think that is the goal for the next 10 years. We're not looking for further than that. 10 years is where we have to actually focus all our energy to just, make this turnaround. Thank you.
Live.
There we go.
There we go.
So Renee's answer is so wonderful, because I think we are all, I don't want to speak for Ted, but I'm going to a little bit, but we have all kind of grappling with the same issue of governance, of building up, of both, and the layers of policy and ground up, and where those meet in a very short time horizon. And one of the things that I think about a lot in our work is, you asked about leveraging philanthropy and other relationships. I cannot tell you how wonderful it has been for us to be part of the Water Funder Initiative, this collaborative conversation around water. So for us, we focus in Texas and beyond, but we cannot be alone. We are not the only ones. We really don't have a lot of money in comparison to government and private industry. We have to think collaboratively. We've got to have that same collective impact that we've been championing for our NGOs on the ground. We've got to be doing that at a philanthropic level as well, and working with each other. And the nice thing about this collaborative approach is that while I focus in Texas, I'm able to work kind of at a much broader regional scale, Western U.S., learn from collaboratives like what's going on in the Colorado River. How can I bring that to Texas in the Rio Grande? Where can I leverage relationships? Where can I leverage learnings, relationships, all of the things? So for my personal perspective, that is tremendous. And I've seen such a huge shift even in the last 2 years in terms of how that collaboration really impacts the organizations on the ground and their ability to have the capacity to do the work that they know that they have to do. So that's
Great.
Amen. I mean, we think of philanthropy, it really is a drop in the bucket. But if we can position that money in the right ways, in the right collaboratives, and build it with partnerships with philanthropy, with private capital, we can unleash the fire hose of public resources. And you can see that today with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the billions of dollars that are available for water infrastructure, for communities, for tribes, for better managing our rivers and our forests. And then more recently with the Inflation Reduction Act, again, there were $20 billion for climate smart ag, and there was $4 billion for Western drought issues. And so, then the next challenge, and it's still a big challenge for philanthropy, is working together to help unleash that capital in the right ways, because certainly there have been wasteful federal programs and spending in the past, and I'm sure there will be in the future. So we need to hold the federal government accountable. We need transparency. We need to be working together to build capacity within NGOs, within more local or state agencies to actually capitalize on that funding and deploy it towards good projects that are going to lead to better outcomes and better impact. And that's our challenge, and it's a big one. It's a big challenge for everyone in this room and all of the communities that you go back to. We have to succeed, though, because we've been lucky in terms of how there's been foresight about how to leave a future for us, and we have to do that same kind of thinking, that intergenerational thinking, to think about what are we leaving for our kids and grandkids and their kids and grandkids. And anyhow.
Great.
I just wanted to add one thing. So you all probably know this, but I really didn't because I'm relatively new to philanthropy. But so what I've seen is, okay, so we have money, we give money out, support organizations on the ground, people on the ground, leaders, elevating the voices, and then what is really tremendous and what makes huge changes is when grantees end up being in positions of power at the governmental level. That is something that I guess I didn't realize it, but that happened, and a whole lot of things happened with respect to water and climate. So,
Interesting. Good. I'm curious, as water funders in particular, but also more broadly as environmental funders, and Renee, you mentioned the carbon credit related funding. I'm curious how climate change has impacted the way you give money. How has it impacted it? And then, I have another question related to that, but I'll keep it separate.
Oh, thank you, Deb. Well, the Fondo Mexicano is the first direct access entity in Mexico accredited by the Green Climate Fund. So we've learned, very hard how to look at every single project with a climate lens. And it's been really just groundbreaking for us because, we have to actually look at 30-year trends of variables such as temperature and rainfall, as well as projections for the next 10 years. And the results are just astonishing. I always thought as an ecologist, well, you're going to see a lot of variance and you're not going to look at the trends. You're not going to distinguish the trends. The trends are there, and they are really scary. So if then you add to this, just climate change projections, the land use changes, then we face areas such as northern Mexico where the war for water and the adaptation to higher temperatures is already evident, right? So that just, promoting these practices such as regenerative ranching instead of, cultivating cotton, and conservation of rivers, which allows you for adaptation, are nature-based solutions that will abide well both for adaptation as well as mitigation for climate change.
Right. Ted?
Yeah, I mean, for me, in my role at the Walton Family Foundation, and also for me personally, it has affected me. It's affected me personally, and the urgency is how I'm looking at it. I live in Louisville, Colorado, which is located about 20 miles up the highway, and in December of this year, we lost 1,000 homes, and it, happened in a matter of a couple hours. There were 115-mile-per-hour winds, and we are experiencing climate change through wildfires. We are experiencing it through water, through floods, and through droughts. On the Colorado River, we were met a couple of weeks ago in Santa Fe with water leaders, and we are potentially within 18 months of there being no Colorado River water flowing through the Grand Canyon. And we have to come to grips with that. This climate change is impacting us in dramatic and very quick ways, and we have to be more nimble. We have to be more creative. We have to be less self-focused. We need to look at how do we all as a community come together and solve these problems. And urgency is the key thing that I'm focused on in the context of it. And it really is a dramatic world that we're living in right now. And yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything?
Sure. For anybody who lives in Texas, this is like a daily kind of occurrence. I mean, we are a couple of years ago with a winter storm that knocked out the power grid and also knocked out all of our water systems, and people were without water, died because of this. That is climate change driven. And we have hurricanes that kill people. We have droughts. I mean, it is for us in a state where we don't talk about climate change, we experience it day after day after day after day. And so like in terms of like how I can use this position or how we think about climate change in our grant making, it's core to our grant making. It has been from the start of the foundation in a state where we're still denying it at every level. But we can talk about, weather patterns. We can talk about, extreme, disasters. Yeah. So I don't know. It's disheartening, but it's also like but for us, for the people on the ground, let me back up. I do want to say something. I heard in other panels something about like, especially in the Rio Grande basin, what we need are people coming to us with solutions and not so much on the activist side. I fully, wholeheartedly, 100% disagree with that. That is a model that has not worked in Texas, in the Rio Grande, in this particular part of the country, and binationally. And so for me, like what I have been doing is really elevating that activist voice, because that is what we have to change. So anyway, that's my soapbox.
Great. Thank you. A few folks have asked about specific challenges related to funding in the Borderlands region, and what are particular challenges either with raising funds or with making grants, with realizing impact, and whether any of you can speak to that.
Maybe I'll start.
Yeah.
It does present challenges. I will say it also presents opportunities, and I was pleased to see Lorenzo just speak before with Fondo Mexicano, and we worked with Mexican funds, Rio Grande, and so it created a greater community of funders that we could work with to solve these problems. Heineken came in with some funding. Keurig Dr. Pepper from the U.S. side had helped fund some of the work around the pulse flows and the restoration work that was happening there. But it also, it created a greater opportunity, and it was very challenging, especially with Minute 319. We needed to figure out how we could get private dollars, philanthropic dollars, like public federal agency dollars, CELA and IBWC dollars, and we ended up going through NIFWIF, but we were talking through that a little bit, and I went back to just remind myself in advance of the talk, there were so many complicated MOUs and spreadsheets, and we had the whole thing with the pesos versus the dollars, and so it created just logistical complications. But I completely think that it's worthwhile to do it, and maybe there's some models, or I think you could do things like change the law, or you could come up with different models, and maybe there are other models in the world that are a better fix. But anyhow, so there's some challenges and there's some opportunities there.
Right. Do you want to add anything? I know you worked on Rio Grande issues more before.
I did,
I'm
and
just curious.
I was thinking about challenges and in working in the Rio Grande, and I was like writing notes, and I was like, oh my God, there's so many. And you guys have heard them. You've also heard all of the folks really talking about just the wonderful collaborative approaches to what's going on the ground in the Rio Grande on both sides of the border and across state boundaries. I would say from a philanthropic lens, what I see is like a lot of conflicting priorities with such limited funds, working especially on the Texas border. So, we're talking about, okay, should we give our money to human rights issues versus, protecting the environment? And those are those unfortunate false dichotomies that we, with those limited funds, kind of end up having to navigate. I also think that and I've heard this kind of like in the philanthropic world since I've been here, it's that the politics of the state of Texas in particular are a tremendous challenge for anybody outside of Texas wanting to come in, because there's a sort of like a myth of you can't do conservation in a state with these types of with like very, very conservative Republican politics, and so that is a huge challenge. But again, through this water collaborative work, it's been really helpful to just have those conversations and kind of break down those myths between different philanthropies that fund nationally and that don't know how to engage in Texas. Now, Texas, we are our own universe. And we have created walls because we are our own universe. And so because of that, there are barriers that are self-inflicted. So yeah, breaking down barriers is an opportunity. So I did end on a positive note.
Renee, anything to add about working in the Borderlands?
Yeah, I think, the greatest challenge in the Borderlands, as anywhere else, is really an issue of capillarity. I think that no time before, there's been so much interest from the private financial sector in conservation. So in the 80s and 90s, we used to, as biologists, ask for, we wish that somebody would look at us, there's so much harm being done on the planet. Now the financial sector has turned around and said, here's the money. And then we're like, oops, how do we even connect this financial world with this conservation world? They speak different languages. And not only that, but the polarization in the world has been pulling them apart even further. And so you have, for example, the multilateral organizations that are in between that help, sometimes bridge that. They are putting more and more requirements like no time before. And so, that is difficult. And then for the organizations on the ground, the requirements in Mexico for organizations on the ground have also increased like no time before. And so we're seeing for the first time in 30 years that we assign grants to organizations, and because they see how much work it is to keep it with the fiscal requirements and with the donors requirement, they actually decide to cancel that. And that has never happened before. And of course, the security issues. So work in the field, let's face it, now it's facing a real problem of security. So those are challenges that have to be addressed. But I think Northern Mexico is an area in the world just primed to turn those challenges into opportunities, because you have, people that have a culture of translation, just that the border makes it happen, it's two cultures. And at the same time, the business view, the focus on businesses make that easier for these two worlds to merge.
Great. I wanted to ask a question about equity. There's been a kind of a moment, not that there wasn't already conversation about it, but I think within philanthropy about how to ensure that the grant-making process and the grant-making outcomes support social equity, racial equity, community benefits as much as possible. And I'm curious how you've handled that with regard to your grant making and/or any other insights you have about that. Do you want to start?
Sure. I think I started with that, but it's really, again, one of the core pillars of what we do at the Mitchell Foundation. It's not typical of other foundations necessarily that work in the environment in Texas. That's not true outside of Texas. There are a lot. And even more so kind of over the last, I don't know, like what, 10 years or so? So the question is, how do we engage, or how do we ensure equity in our grant making?
Or what do you see as, what have you found challenging? I know in our conversation beforehand, you were talking about some of the structural factors. And we don't have a huge amount of time, but I just thought I'd see if.
There are lots of challenges. And it's also, it's in what I find or had found was that when I would bring equity to the table as a concept, like, hey, we've got to stop. We've got to think about equity. Hey, folks who work in the environmental world, people are the ones that make decisions. People are the ones that feel the impact of climate and all of the decisions. How do you work in equity? How do you think about equity in your environmental work? Even if you're just doing ecological, restoration.
Great.
What is the equity? And so that's kind of how I've encountered it at all levels. Like, what is equity? I don't do equity. I'm a scientist. So
Great.
Anyway, I could go on and on and on.
Anybody else want to add anything before we close up?
I'll just say it's been a journey for us. We are definitely looking for ways to include equity in everything we do. And I think back to some meetings early days with some of the tribes. Lorelei talked a little bit about the 10 Tribes Partnership. And I remember going down there and talking to them and saying, here's what's important to us. Come work with us and let's work together. And it didn't go real well. And I think we needed to say, what's important to you? And working with communities and listening, it's a huge part of what we need to do from philanthropy is listen to communities and what they want, what they need, what they care about, and then meet them where they are. And we can talk about what's important to us as well eventually, but you have to build the relationship and the trust, and it takes time. And we work in 5-year increments, and philanthropy can have a really long vision, but we and our trustees have to, and I think they do understand, and they've made these commitments, is it's going to take longer if we're working with tribal communities and with other communities. We have to meet them where they are, and it may take a longer time to get where we all collectively want to go, but we'll reach more durable solutions in the end.
Renee, would you like to add anything?
Oh, yes. On the issue of safeguards, we have been working for a long time on that. And I can tell you that it's very interesting what is happening in the world. You can see that the private sector is now talking about ESG, environment, social, and governance. And they're trying to determine how you measure that, how do you develop standards for that. And they are actually going and tapping into the multilaterals, like the World Bank and IFC and KfW. All of them have developed the safeguards over time. However, what's happening is that what used to be a nice concept of integrating the lens of labor rights and indigenous rights and also cultural aspects or environmental aspects, all of a sudden become an obstacle because you have to address and mitigate all those risks and just from the bank perspective, So we really need to work hard to make this an integral part of the projects that we want to fund. And that is a real challenge. How do you make it easy, simple, so that, as Ted was saying, we need things to be nimble, to actually work fast. and
Great.
to actually do it right. So, I mean, it's a real challenge.
Yeah, thank you. We are out of time, and I apologize. There were so many good questions and so many other things to talk about that we may need to do a follow-up webinar or something. Come back to this next year, but I am so grateful for all of your time and for all the great audience interest, and look forward to the continuing conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.